having a...
Okay, good. I thought it might have been me because I've been having trouble with this microphone. I did last week and I have this morning, and it came off completely, so I'm talking about the receiver, not the microphone. So I'm going to stick it there and hope it doesn't fall down. We okay? Good. Good. Well, like I said earlier, and as the Sergeant Major said as well, I've chosen to speak on a topic called the matters of the heart, and each of these particular messages are coming from the book of Psalms. There's so many places where you could find the topic, but I've just chosen to use them from the Psalms. And I want to read the psalm this morning, and it's a very short one, and there's really only one verse that really deals with what I want to talk about. But listen to the psalm, or turn to it if you like. It's Psalm 131. It's a song of David, and it says this. David says, "My heart is not proud, O Lord. My eyes are not haughty. I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me. But I have stilled and quieted my soul like a weaned child and its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forevermore." Albert Einstein is not a theologian, but he's a man that we know was a great brain. He once said this. He said, "Everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit in the face of which we, with our modest powers, must feel humble." Now, I read that and I thought, Albert Einstein? Modest powers? Feel humble? Wow, this is kind of encouraging, isn't it? I mean, here is somebody who we know who is keenly in touch with the universe, with life in general, a brain that he is, the depth of his knowledge, and being with all in touch with that vastness, he's saying these words. I'm dealing with things that are beyond my comprehension, beyond my control, and beyond my understanding. And so Einstein humbly bows before them. That is encouraging. Humility. I thought I might read to you what the New International Version's definition of humility is all about. And this is what it says. It's taken from my study Bible. Pride. It says, more than anything else, it is human pride that pits man against God. Above all else, pride is what pits man against God. We get in the way of God because of our pride, and I'm talking generally now. Now, of course, there are other psalms that I could have gone to, but it is this 13-word definition of the NIV that I went to, and it spoke to me. Where big-headedness and egotistical attitudes do damage to people, and we can know that we need to address all that, it is actually how we act before God that is the bigger problem. We think sometimes that we know it all, and that God, he can just fit in where we want him to. And that's where pride starts to come in. This is another Psalm of King David. David is dealing with inner feelings, and he comes very honest before the Lord. And with a sort of a kind of a self-defense attitude, he asks the Lord to test his heart, so that he might be sure that he was not like his predecessor, King Saul, who wasn't such a nice man at all and really had a bit of a big head about who he was. And David was kind of the leader who, unlike the leaders of today, he actually shared his weaknesses. But when I talk about his weaknesses, they really weren't so much weaknesses as they were limitations. Look at the end of the first verse where it says this, "I do not concern myself with great matters or things too wonderful for me." This is a leader saying this. In essence, David is saying, there is much about life that I do not understand, and what's more, I'm not even going to concern myself about it. Now, as I look at the many problems of today, for which we're all the time looking for solutions to, where we might tolerate the confession of a leader who might say, I do not understand all things that are happening, we might tolerate that. I'm not so sure if we would be happy when we heard him follow it up and say, but I'm not going to concern myself about those things. Putting into the proper perspective, we should bring all the knowledge and all the intellect we possess to our various situations. But like David in verse 2, regarding God and his ways, we should never, ever, ever feel that we have progressed any farther than a weaned child who is totally dependent on its mother. One commentary that I read said how the Hebrew mind of that day would read this verse, and in light of God's greatness, they would think of man as being no older than a 3-year-old child. Now, that's then. I mean, we live in the 21st century now. And I'm sure many of us just marvel at technology. 3-year-old? Well, maybe we've reached the ripe old age of 6 or 7, possibly. I don't know. But to put it in proper perspective, we cannot live as though we know better than God and regard him as being irrelevant, as many people do today. He still is God the Father. Or if you don't like that phrase, because we changed genders these days and all sorts of things, God the parent, if you like it that way, he still is the person that watches over us as our guardian and our father. But we do come across these people who see him as being irrelevant, I should say. And this is where pride starts to come in. So what we want to do this morning is to talk about this word humility as found in Psalm 131 and begin with the definition of humility. Now, I wonder how many of you have trouble with this Christian grace about being humble. Not in the sense that you doubt that we should be humble, because we should be, and it's all over the scriptures. We come humbly before him, and I don't have any problem with that. But here's the frustration that I've had in my years, especially as being an officer. Those of you who are officers, and I see one or two of my friends down here today, you will have done what I had to do when we were officers, and maybe sometimes people do it in their workplaces where you have self-evaluations. And it's a good thing to do because you need to evaluate what's going on so you can improve on where the weaknesses are and all the rest of it. So we sit down and we do these self-evaluation tests. Well, that's okay until you start to really get into some things and you just wonder how to, like for instance, if I have to self-evaluate myself on love or patience and commitment, okay, that's a little bit difficult to do. I kind of wish that somebody else would tell me what they think about me. But no, you've got to self-evaluate yourself. And so when it comes to humility, I have to self-evaluate myself in how humble I am. And it doesn't sound quite right to me when you say, now look at me, this is a picture of one very humble person. I mean, it almost sounds contradictory, doesn't it, you know? You might even think that that person's a little bit arrogant because they think that they're humble. But somehow we have to make an evaluation of how humble that we are. It's difficult. Well, notice what is happening with David as he evaluates himself here. He says, my heart is not proud, O Lord. Now, when I saw that, that's why I like this text, because David isn't walking around telling people that he's humble. We're filling some self-evaluation test to say that he's humble and all the rest of it. No, David has retreated into a private place. Who's he speaking to? God, and God only. And he's basically saying, God, test my heart. I am not humble. There's nobody else that he's talking to. And he's being sure that he finds out that he's being very humble about what he's doing. Now, David, was accused many times in his life as being quite big-headed, quite the other way. I don't know if you remember David as a youngster. Well, you will remember David as a youngster. We all know the story when David went down to the battlefield to see his brothers who were serving in the army. You can read about this in 1 Samuel 17. And the armies of the Philistines were going at it with the Israelites. And when David got there, he saw this giant of a man, Goliath. And he became so intrigued by this man that he immediately began to ask questions of the soldiers why it was that nobody would go up against this man. David said, would there not be some financial reward for going up against this man? And one of the soldiers said, oh yeah, certainly. He said, the king has put aside a lot of money for this person. And besides that, he's offering one of his daughters in marriage. And to top it all off, he said that the person who goes up against this man and wins the battle, he will be excused income taxes for the rest of his life. Now, what an incentive to go up against this man. But nobody was about to tackle this giant. And so what does David do? He goes to his older brother. He says, well, I'd like to have a go. And his older brother, and I'm going to quote from the Living Bible here now, it says here, "What are you doing around here anyway?" his older brother says. He says, "What about those sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know what a cocky brat you are. You just want to see the battle, don't you?" And he's getting the wrong idea of why David wants to go up against Goliath. I mean, what a catty thing to say. And that obviously had gone very deep with David, and it hurts him deeply that he should be misunderstood why he was there. And it would seem that that was the law of his life. The criticism never ever left him until after he was dead and buried. And then ironically, the very person who was labeled a person of pride became and continues to be a man who was very humble and a man whose heart was very close to God. There was another occasion later in David's life when he had been successful in getting the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. And he was so excited about this that he organized this big parade down through the town, and they could celebrate the fact that the ark was back. And you can read about this in 2 Samuel 6. Well, David was the parade marshal. And if you like, he rode not at the back of the parade like they do in our parades that we see, but no, he rode at the front of the parade. And he was really excited, and it says that they brought out all the instruments, and they had a big party in the street. And what did David do? David decided that he would break into dancing. Kind of amazing, really, not that he should break into dancing. I mean, it all got into his feet, but what was amazing is that he'd just come back from battle. And so he was, had all of this armor on him and all the stuff that when they were out there fighting. And so what did he do? He just stripped it all off in the middle of the street there and started dancing around. Stopped the parade while he did that. Thousands of people just watched it and joined in. One commentary said they actually did what they call was a rock and roll dance, which was never seen again until the 20th century. Well, I'm not sure about that. But he sure was happy about what he was doing. But his wife came to him later. She'd been watching the whole thing from the palace. And she was not impressed, and she criticized David. She said that from her perspective, he was just bringing all the glory to himself and not to God. And he made a fool of himself, and he should be ashamed of himself. And how did David respond? Well, again, from the Living Bible, it says this, "Lady, I wasn't dancing for you." He said, "I was dancing for the Lord who chose me above your father and his family and who appointed me as a leader of Israel, the people of the Lord. And what's more, I'm willing to look even more foolish than this. And I will be respected, even to those who feel were offended by my actions." What do we learn from all of this? The price that some people have to pay because they're successful. We don't usually talk about this, do we? Sometimes it's harder to deal with the successes than it is the failures. People get jealous. They don't like it when they see some people. It happens in church, doesn't it? I've seen it. And what do? People misunderstand you. They think all you are is big-headed and you want the glory and all the rest of it. How do you deal with something like that? What do? I mean, you can fight, you can resist those situations. You just say, okay, I'll just step down and let somebody else do the job. Is that the way to do it as well? No, you go before the Lord. And that's what David was doing right here. You go before the Lord and you say, "Lord, am I really big-headed? No. Test my heart. Please let me know if this is true." And in those moments when the heart is sincere, the people of whom have given you all that criticism, they do seem to disappear out of sight. The only issue of concern is in those times is making peace with God. And so we come to him in those quiet moments and we search the depths of our hearts, happy to do whatever it takes to know that we are the people of high integrity. Never would we ever want to bring glory to ourselves, but it is the power that is within us that helps us very often do things that people think we're big-headed about. Someone may ask the question, so what about the significance of humility? Why is it so important? Why is it God talks about this so much in the Bible? Did you know that the Greeks, embracing all the Christian graces as they did not consider humility a virtue? In fact, they despised humility, much the same way that many people do today. Why? Because all too often people associate humility as meekness. And when you start talking about meekness, people use the word weakness If you're meek, you're weak. But of course, you look in your Bible and you find humility and meekness all over the place. It's a massive virtue. In fact, it's one that Jesus taught. One of the 8 Beatitudes that he preached, one was on being humble. Not only that, we discover that when we read our Bibles that pride, which of course is the opposite of humility, is one of the worst things a human being can be accused of. In fact, God so far as to say this in Proverbs 8:13, pride do I hate. There's not too many things that God hates, but he hates pride. Why is God so concerned about pride, and why does he so strongly endorse and applaud a humble spirit? I'll tell you why. Because pride tends to deify a person. You understand that word? It means that you almost make yourself bigger than God. I am a God, if you like. And so you put yourself in the place of God. Terribly dangerous thing to do. You can find an example of this in the Bible. When Ezekiel was prophesying, there was a king of Tyre, and he had a bit of a big head. And so this is what the Lord told Ezekiel to tell the king of Tyre. He said, "The sovereign Lord says to you, O king, in the pride of your heart you say, I am a god. I sit on the throne of a god in the heart of the seas, but you are a man and not a god, though you think you are wise as a god." In Ezekiel 28:2. What is the problem here? Well, the king of Tyre was so impressed with his own humanity that he had elevated in place almost to a point of deity. He is to be worshipped. We saw that with a lot of the leaders in the Old Testament, didn't we? Bow down and worship them. And so God says to him, "King of Tyre, please listen to me. Get yourself in perspective. You are in dire danger of destroying yourself. You are not a god, you are a man." And then we say, but that's not a problem today. I mean, people know that we're not gods. We're men. We're people. And I say, are you sure about that? I meet people every day of the week, and I'm sure you do too, whom it seems that they know better than God. They will hear some kind of a message come from you as a Christian, or from the church in general, and they'll say, that's not relevant to today's world. How relevant those words to Timothy about preaching the gospel when he said, "Preach the word, for the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine." He said, instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. And this is an age, you've got to admit it, an age that is fading into nothingness as far as God is concerned, even in the church. It saddens me to think that in Peterborough, where I worship, I'm sure here in Lindsay as well, we have churches around us where we cannot agree on matters of doctrine and even on matters of social concerns that we have dealing with all the time in our society. Concerns that sometimes are clearly addressed in the Bible. I don't like to get too much on this because I know people have different ideas about it, but there's 2 areas that I feel so strongly about, and I hope it's unanimous in this room this morning. The biblical standard of 2 people joining together in an intimate relationship is just one example. And how quiet do we become about murdering unborn children? The Toronto Right to Life organization report that about 300 unborn babies are aborted. This is abortion on demand, by the way, in Canada every day. 300 babies. And if the church is not the conscience of a nation, then how far can the nation stray in morals and ethics without God? That's why we've got to be on our guard and speak out. And what about our beliefs? I have a pastor friend, he's actually retired now, of another denomination. The sad part is that he was in the Salvation Army for many years and sat alongside me on the cornet bench as well in a corps. I went to training college. He left and went to be a minister of another denomination. And I met him some years later, quite a few years later, because I hadn't seen him. We've been in different parts of the world. And all of a sudden, in my discussion with him, I discovered that he no longer believes in what we believe, the cross of Jesus Christ, the resurrection, the miracles of Jesus. All of those come into question. And I say, is this man not playing God? Is that not what we're talking about? And you know as well that when we talk about churches, thinking about churches today, You know, there are churches out there who claim to be Christian, but they're preaching a different gospel to what I'm preaching. In fact, there are Bibles out there now that are being written that aren't written the same as what my Bible is. Things are changed. Why? Because people want to hear what their itching ears want to hear, and so they write the Bible that way. They make their religion that way. It's scary stuff. Don't ever doubt that there are people all around us, both in and out of the church, who have become so convinced of their own philosophies that, like the king of Tyre, they have made God seem totally irrelevant today. So I want to wrap it up. What do we need to take away from here this morning so that we know that we have a humble heart? Humility means an absence, a complete absence of pride. And of course, what I'm trying to say here this morning, yes, pride in all shapes and forms is not right. But certainly when you stand in the place of God and think you know better than him, you have a proud heart. That is not acceptable. And I don't think I even need to reiterate that this morning. We know that. What it means when we come before God is that we claim bankruptcy, self-assurance, and self-reliance on the only one we can, which is God himself. It also means that in the presence of a holy God, we are nothing, we know nothing, absolutely nothing, we can produce nothing, we can do nothing to make God happy. To capitalize is to say that before God, we are tremendously aware of our utter nothingness. I hope I haven't put you down by saying that, because you know in what context I am trying to say. Allow God to take control. We cannot make it without him. I love to illustrate this with a story that Jesus told of the two people who went up to the temple to pray, and you can read this in Luke 18. And one of these men was a very humble man, and he came before the Lord. He fell on his face in great shame. And by the way, this is the true definition of humility. When he said, "Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner." If you ever pray that prayer, you've got no chance of having a proud heart. Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner. But the other man, there's a bit of humor here if you look for it in Jesus. Jesus told the story. He said that the Pharisee stood and he prayed thus with himself. God, I thank you that I am not like other men. Maybe you missed the humor. It's that part that says he prayed thus with himself. See what I'm trying to say? Proudly he stood there. Not like other men. Which one do you think that God listened to the most and forgave their sin? It really says it all. It'd be nice to have the worship band come up here now. Just talk. Excuse me. I was looking for a song, and I asked Cheryl if we could possibly use this with the worship band this morning, because it's one of the great songs of the church. So well known, and I think sometimes when we have songs that we know so well, we can very easily just sing the words and not really notice what we're saying. And again, with me, I had to read this song again to remind myself of what it's really trying to say. And there is no better song than what Isaac Watts wrote when he said, "I survey the wondrous cross." The first two verses especially, let me just read those to you and comment on it. It says, "When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died," here it is, "my richest gain I count but loss, and I pour contempt on all my pride." What a wonderful way to come before God. And then in the second verse, almost as if David is speaking again, coming before the Lord, says, "Lord, test my heart." We can use this verse this morning and say, "God, test my heart." Because it says, "Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood." We're just going to sing this song, and I'm going to allow the worship band here to really take over when we get into it. But remember those words. Remember those words this morning. This is an opportunity for us to come really close to God and to ask him to look inside and see what is really happening. And if it needs to be this morning that somebody feels that they need to make a commitment of some kind. You can do it this morning, even in your seat. You can raise your hand. You can make it known that you want to be prayed for. But you can also come here, and somebody will talk to you and try and give you some counsel and help you where you can go in your spiritual life. The important thing is that we just use these next few moments to come close to God and allow him to speak to us. Let's go together.